Are 4 paws better than 2? We'll find out this week on Motoring 2004.
TSN's Motoring 2004 is brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oil. Oils fine-tuned for different engines. And Midas, Total Car Care. We do that.
Wintertime. Some people love it, other people get depressed just thinking about it. But you know, there's no denying its beauty. But for car enthusiasts, winter can cause a bit of a problem, especially back in the old days, because a decision had to be made. Do you drive the love of your life in the winter or not? And if it was a European model, that decision became even tougher. I mean, take a Jaguar. I mean, you wouldn't even think of trying to start one, let alone drive one in the winter. But now we fast forward to 2004. We find ourselves outside of Vail, Colorado, where Jaguar has invited journalists to check out its new X-Type. Well, they're not worried about it starting, but they want to prove that their first all-wheel vehicle can not only survive in the winter, it can also excel.
The X-Type is a very, very important car for Jaguar because it is in the sweet spot of where the premium industry is in Canada. Today, over 58% of premium car sales are in compact premium. We're the only vehicle in the class that is standard all-wheel drive. So we have a really strong value proposition for our competition in Canadian weather, and we think it's a terrific vehicle.
The old days are very simple to sum up. It was a wing and a prayer. You prayed that it would start, and then you prayed that you got to where you were going, and if you did, hey, that was a good thing. But you know what? Around about 1988 or so, Sir John Egan came into the company.
When I first joined Jaguar Cars, it was quite clear that we had a big job to do to get a viable product.
And he transformed Jaguar from what it was, which was a terrible company in terms of quality and all the rest of it, into what it is today. And they've got some marvellous products today. And reliability and quality is right up there with the best of them now. Well, the X-Type was launched. It was based on a Mondeo platform, which was primarily a front-wheel drive car that the Ford sold in Europe. That was not what Jaguar wanted. What they wanted was a rear-wheel drive car. And so the only way they could make it so was to make it four-wheel drive. And so to keep the Jaguar-ness in the car, so when you drive it, you do get oversteer, you do feel it's a true Jaguar. It's like a Jaguar-ness that, if you think back to the E-Types, you still get that very solid rear drive sensation. They've done a bang-up job with it.
Basically, it's an epicyclic gear set with a torque split 60-40 to the rear to give it that rear handling balance, and uses this epicyclic gear set to split the torque, goes back down the prop shaft and out to a rear differential.
The X-Type is 54% of our total sales in Canada. We do about 1,200 units a year the last 2 years. And with the repositioning of the 3-liter, pricing it down versus our peer competition, we're hoping to grow on that figure for 2004.
Yeah, I think there is a degree of doing a winter driving school as a hook that they're hoping to pull people in and prove to them that Jaguars aren't fair weather cars. I mean, not so long ago, if you had a Jaguar and you drove it in winter, you were either very brave or very silly.
Conditions like this, as you can see around, you've got to have four-wheel drive. I think it's something that you really need, and it's not just in the snow. You can get very skittish on a fast motorway with a lot of surface water. Four-wheel drive gives you that extra confidence, particularly combined with the dynamic stability control and the emergency brake assist. Just gives you that confidence that it's a great car and a feeling that you're on the road, you're glued to it. We've got two varieties, a 2.5 litre, which we call the baby one, and we have a 3 litre. The 2.5 is 192 brake horsepower, and the 3 litre is 227, and that's a really high power ratio for this size of small engine.
We're still a niche company. I mean, at the end of the day, we have 4 models, and we still have a lot of work to go in terms of building our scale, but we don't really want to be too big a player. We want to offer that distinctive premium offering that is unique and finds its own little niche. But in today's competitive world, you do have to put some points on the board in terms of volume to give your customers all the benefits they expect. So we want to grow, but we don't want to grow crazy. We still want to be a niche player, but a little bigger player than we are today.
Speeding? Me? Honest, officer? Well, at least you better hope he's honest. More later on Kenzie's Corner.
You know, with the demise of the full-size station wagon, minivans came to dominate suburbia. However, of late, the whole notion of what actually makes a good minivan is changing. This week on Test Drive, we look at Ford's new Freestar. The reason for the popularity of the modern minivan is simple. From Saturday morning soccer runs to a night out on the town, few vehicles offer as much versatility, flexibility and comfort. The reworked interior comes off as being very good. If you go with the Limited, well, it's fully loaded, but better yet, all of the controls are logically placed and large enough to operate with a gloved hand. You also get steering wheel mounted radio controls and cruise controls, plus a decent set of instrumentation. But the best bit, you know, are the power adjustable pedals. What you do, you set the seat relative to the steering wheel and then power the pedals back to suit leg length. Now this does 2 good things for you. Number 1, if the airbag does deploy, because you're far enough back, you're less likely to bite it. But more importantly, because of the correct driving position, if the worst does happen, well, you've got a better chance of avoiding it in the first place. Beneath the hood sits a much needed new engine. While still essentially the same as the previous 3.8 litre lump, the upsized 4.2 litre V6 brings much better power. True, the stallion count only rises by 1 to 201, but in the torque department it takes a big step forward, rising from 240 pound-feet at 3600 to a much better 265 at a lower 3500 RPM. Best of all, a full 90% of it shows up for work at 1500, which is where it is the most useful in everyday driving. The downside is that the engine still makes a gruff, almost unpleasant sound whenever it's forced to work for its living. Thankfully, the 4-speed automatic transmission keeps the engine out of its resonant range during the puttering that accounts for most of the drive. You know, at one time, if you wanted to increase the cargo space in the back of a minivan, you had one choice, and that was quite simply lift a very heavy seat out of the van and store it in the garage. No longer needed. Getting rid of the seat is that simple. However, with that simplicity comes a couple of compromises which I think spoils the design. To begin with, if you've got to carry 5 people and their luggage, you've got one choice, and that's to take the center seat out as I have done and store the luggage there. Now that has possible dangers, primarily because the load will shift under hard acceleration, or worse still, in a crash. The problem is there's no tie downs to secure the luggage, so it ends up right here in my lap. The other thing, this seat is just plain uncomfortable. It sits way too low to the floor, so there's absolutely no thigh support, and I'm not a big guy and I take up almost half the seat. You've got to sit 3 big guys back here. Good luck. The new Freestar is more comfortable than most minivans, as its long wheelbase, supple springs and soft damping characteristics combine to minimise the rigours of the roughest road. On the flip side, it's typical of most minivans in that the pylon test saw plenty of body roll, and if you start going quickly, it slips into understeer. That said, the inclusion of Advanced Track, which is an electronic stability control system that uses the standard anti-lock brakes to counter minor bouts of over and understeer, a good traction control system and oversized P235 60R16 tyres, well, they deliver a reassuring feel and a prompt response to steering input. You know, when it comes to safety, the Freestar is better than most. To begin with, you get dual stage front airbags that also include a number of sensors. It looks for a front seat passenger, monitors where the driver's seat is positioned and seatbelt usage. It then uses all of this information to determine the best deployment strategy. It can actually even cancel deployment if it's likely to do more harm than good. You also get side seat mounted airbags for the front seat riders and a drop-down curtain airbag that protects the occupants in all 3 rows. But where this one differs from most is the fact that it also has a rollover detector. Now, if it does detect a rollover, the airbag deploys, but it stays inflated for up to 6 seconds, which gives the passengers better protection as the vehicle rolls over. In other words, first-class safety. The Freestar's other plus is the commanding view of the road ahead and the lack of any significant blind spots. Simply enormous heated side mirrors that come with turn signal repeaters and a reverse sensing system ensure that nothing sneaks up unexpectedly. The brakes on the Freestar are also up to snuff, taking just 36 metres to bring the heavy van to rest from 80 kilometres an hour. The only quibble is the rather wooden feel to the brake pedal. You know, if you happen to be a family of 4, this Freestar will work very nicely for you. However, if you happen to be a family of 5 or more, it plain and simply will not work. And that's because you can only get 2 captain's chairs in the middle row of seats. Ford should offer an optional 3-seat bench for the middle row. That way you can accommodate 5 people, put the luggage where it belongs, and that's behind the seat, and yet still retain the flexibility of the hide-and-go seat.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns a noise we refer to as piston slap. Piston slap is a hollow, knocking sound that some small engines tend to make when they're cold and being accelerated. If you've got a car with a small, high RPM 4-cylinder engine, you may have heard this. Now, they typically don't make it when they're brand new, but after 30 or 40,000 K, it's not uncommon to hear piston slap until that temperature gauge gets up to normal operating temperature. It's not cause for alarm, but there's a couple of things you can do to help deal with it. First of all, make sure that you're using quality lubricants and changing them when you should and keeping the engine topped up. Also, warming the engine up a little bit will help. Idle the engine for a minute or 2, long enough for that temp gauge to start to climb onto the scale before you drive away. And consider using a block heater or installing one if you don't have one, because it's closely tied to engine temperature. The warmer that engine is, the less likely it is to produce piston slap. So the quicker and easier you can get it up to operating temperature, the more you'll reduce piston noise in that engine. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Well, this is our annual Master Technician competition, our 7th actually. We select the 10 finalists by a series of written examinations over the winter months, and we take the top 10 from our different regions across the country, invite them and their partners to come into Toronto, and have a sort of a competition bake-off where we choose the best technician in the country.
Well, we feel it's necessary to raise the whole level of awareness of technicians and to the whole industry. It's very difficult to get people to come into this line of work these days, and so this whole competition is geared to raising the awareness of technicians across the country.
Each technician has a repair order similar to what they would get in the dealership, and there's a series of problems with the car. And they're written down in the way a customer would comment on the problem, and they then solve that problem, correct that problem. And there's about 10 or 12 of them, and depending on how many that they solve and solve correctly, determines who is the best tech.
Faites attention s'il vous plaît, you have 5 minutes left. Il vous reste 5 minutes. It's nothing like the real world. You've probably got a day's work compacted in a span of 2 hours, with problems that are simulated to be the real world. But on your worst day of the week, you'd never have that many problems at once.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
They were quite in-depth and a little bit tough to find. Had to find the information first, and that seemed a little bit of a problem to me for a while, but a lot of them were tough.
A little bit more time, maybe. There's not that much recognition for the fellows, and this is our way, sort of paying back the industry, and that no doubt we get a little press from it. That's the added bonus, but that's not the focus. The focus is to recognize our fellows and reward them for their efforts.
You know, Jaguar has sold over 165,000 X-Types in North America since it was first launched in 2001. And of course, they'd like to sell a lot more. And with that in mind, they continue to make the vehicle more attractive, and that includes the price. In fact, the new model is now $3,000 cheaper than the old one, and Jag has also added $2,000 worth of enhancements. And you know, with those numbers, even our man in the Quaker State Garage, Bill Gardner, might be tempted to buy his first Jag. How about it, Bill?
Not a chance, Brad. Ask yourself, does Jag make a pickup truck? There's your answer there, buddy. I used to be fascinated with their V12 engines, though. I always liked the sound of them, but that's about where it ended with me and Jaguar. Anyhow, we've got an email this week from one of our viewers. John Jones is his name. He asks a question that's kind of neat, because a lot of people don't think about this or ask this question until it's too late and they've already purchased the vehicle. They find out that maybe they bought more than they really needed. What he's asking is, he's looking at buying, he says he wants to buy a used half-ton pickup truck, fairly late model, years 96 to 2000. He wants a no-frills truck with a strong V8 engine. He said, but I was wondering if I should shell out the extra for one that is equipped with four-wheel drive. He says he does a lot of city driving, only goes out to the country occasionally, and he presently has a 96 Dodge Caravan, a front-wheel drive, and he finds that handles his driving conditions pretty well. Well, John, you've pretty well answered the situation here with a couple of key points in your letter. First of all, you say you want a no-frills vehicle. Well, if you want a no-frills vehicle, you want a no-frills powertrain as well. You want to keep it simple, and that means, in the case of the pickup truck, two-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive. Your Caravan, you found, is just fine with front-wheel drive. The pickup will be just fine in the rear-wheel drive format, providing you've got a good set of winter tires on it. You won't have any trouble at all. Now, there are certain applications where four-wheel drive is quite beneficial to some drivers. For example, if you live in mountainous or hilly areas of the country, a four-wheel drive in the wintertime can be a real asset. If you want to plow snow or do landscaping or off-road driving, this is certainly something that you want to consider. Also, if you're launching, for example, a heavy boat on a slippery ramp, a four-wheel drive vehicle, even though you're only using it for that last 50 feet of the boat launch, can really come in handy. If you're trailering an ATV or a snowmobile to remote areas, there's another application where a four-wheel drive may be beneficial. But if your driving is predominantly city or highway, and this is what John says in his letter here, certainly a four-wheel drive vehicle is not something that I'd consider, particularly when he's talking about buying a used vehicle. He's buying one 3 or 4 years old. You're acquiring the vehicle at a time of its life when it's apt to need anything and everything in terms of service and repairs. You want to have the simplest possible powertrain. Stick to the simple things. They work best. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 2004.
A colleague of mine was once stopped for speeding on an automotive press event. Yes, it's been known to happen. and he was encouraged by the police officer to make a $236 contribution to the Monroe County, South Carolina Library Fund. Well, that was one of the more creative fines I'd ever heard of. But you know, in most cases, your fines go either to the municipality or to the province. They don't go to the police department. But I was told by a police officer here in Ontario the other day that in fact there's a disturbing tendency for some local police departments to in fact take the money and keep it. They even put it in their budget, $200,000 for speeding tickets. Now, the Metropolitan Toronto Police specifically say they're not going to go to this, and the Ontario Provincial Police aren't going to go to this, but some jurisdictions are doing it, and they're doing it now. Now, some people think, hey, that's pretty cool. If it doesn't go through the court system, there's no demerit points, and my insurance company never finds out about it. Pay off a guy here, Bob's your uncle. It's like a license to speed. But you know, the court system is there to protect you against the abuse of people in authority. I mean, think about it. You might be out on a lonely road someplace. There's just you and the cop. He's got a gun. Chances are you don't, because this is Canada. Who's to stop him from saying, okay, give me $300? Maybe it goes to the police department. Maybe it goes into his pocket. This is sounding like a movie from the 1950s. I think this is a process that should be stopped, and it should be stopped now. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Earlier on, we saw the Jaguar X-Type taking on winter conditions, but I'm sorry, it doesn't hold a candle to what we're looking at right now. This is the Jaguar XKR. And what's with the machine gun, you ask? Well, this is the same vehicle that was used by the bad guy in the latest James Bond movie, Die Another Day. And you know, there have been times when I've been behind the wheel, I could have used that gun. Hey, I'm just kidding. Don't start with the emails. Anyway, some final thoughts on the X-Type. It's a much refined vehicle over the old one. And you know, the other day, an auto journalist mentioned to me that he felt that more cars should come available with all-wheel drive. Well, the X-Type is the only vehicle in its segment that offers all-wheel drive as standard equipment. So it could be said that Jaguar is indeed on the leading edge, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's it for now. We'll see you next time out as we continue to bring you more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
Carlos Ghosn and Bob Lutz are the kind of people that if I was in the infantry, I'd follow up Hamburger Hill. He literally is the leader that I think all of us think we would be if we were in his position.
TSN's Motoring 2004 has been brought to you by Quaker State Motor Oil, oils fine-tuned for different engines, and Midas, Total Car Care. We do that.